this computer.
Yep, that would be recording.
So you just say
Just got it. Yeah, we just got it.
Okay. Yeah, today I'm gonna make ratatouille, which it sounds fancy, and everybody thinks because it's French, then that makes it like high cuisine. But they forget that, everyday people cook in France and everyday people eat. And ratatouille is actually not highfalutin eaten in France. It's considered a peasant dish. And that's actually where it started, was among the peasants, the grandmas, the mamas, and everybody out there. And you would not get this if you went to a fancy restaurant in France. You would not get ratatouille. You would go to get ratatouille, you would have to go possibly to one of the bistros or one of the cafes further out in the countryside, because it's home cooking in a way. Now, the name ratatouille is actually an amalgam. We think of France being one country with them just speaking French. But the fact is France actually started off as several different regions. You have Normandy, which was controlled by the Vikings. You have the southern part, which was, or towards the west, which was Gaul. And then you had the southern part, which you hear it called the Occitan or the Oc. And that was a name given to them later on. And their language was referred to as Languedoc. Actually refers to the pan or the pot that this dish would be stewed in. And touille is a French word meaning to turn. So ratatouille was the term that they gave for just a dish, a vegetable dish that was stirred around in a pan or a pot. It didn't refer to any specific group of ingredients. It was an understood thing. It was peasant food. You threw in what you had. The ingredients that go into ratatouille are ingredients that are all right in season right now, and they're readily available pretty much year round in and around the Mediterranean. And this dish or versions of it are common all around the Mediterranean. Here in the United States, of course, we can get most of them year round ourselves. But right now, if you go to the market, when you walk through, you'll notice that it's just heaped up. Peppers, onions, eggplant, tomatoes, they're all right in season right now. So it is a cheapy dish, doesn't take real long, and it's basically just a vegetable soup or stew. So what you will need for this is you'll need about a pound in eggplant. And you want to get smallish, you can get one big one, but you get a smallish one. This is a version, everybody's familiar with the dark purple ones. This is one version called Carnival. It's got stripes. You'll find the little bitty baby ones, and you can use those. You'll find a Japanese version, which looks a lot like a purple zucchini. I didn't get any, or I'd show them to you. Bell peppers, you can get a mix. A mix is pretty. If green is all there is, green is what you'd use, because that's what them old French grandmas would have done. They'd have used what they had. So if you had a pepper that was all mixed up in color, great. If you didn't, it's all going in the pot. It's going to cool. The point is to eat it, not stare at it. Onion, same thing. I used red onions today because I thought they look pretty. They're Swedish, and that's what I had. You could also use a yellow or white onion, what you got. Then you're gonna need about a pound and a half of zucchini or summer squash. I bought at the market red and yellow. you're gonna need about a pound, pound and a quarter of that. Don't get too excited about the weights. It doesn't have to be exact. As I said, this is a peasant dish. This is not highfalutin eaten. So if it's a pound and a half or a pound and a quarter, doesn't matter. Roughly about 4 to 6 medium-sized zucchini, hand-sized, I would say, and about, well, that's about half that around. If they're little bitty babies, you can just slice them into rounds or halves. 2, 3 bell peppers, medium to large size, chopped up in roughly bite-sized pieces. Onions, 2 of the large onions. You can slice them thin, you can dice them small. They're gonna pretty much disappear. So if you want bite-sized chunks, do bite-sized chunks. Do what you want to eat. It's tomatoes, because they are fresh and in season now. I got about a pound, pound and a quarter of tomatoes, and I went ahead and skinned them and diced them. Mostly because I don't find skins on tomatoes that tasty, but there's no rule saying that you have to take the skins or the seeds out. Now, if tomatoes are not in season and you want to make this dish, or you want them and you don't, one of the big cans, I think this is like a 28-ounce can of diced tomatoes, doesn't have to be this brand, whatever, diced tomatoes and their juices and stuff works just fine in place of the tomatoes. You'll need about 4 or so cloves of garlic, smushed, chopped, minced, little pieces. If you want to use, if you got the jarred stuff, you can use that. Some thyme, some oregano, or if you've got Italian seasoning, feel free to use the Italian seasoning instead of all the different little herbs. It's just fine. To start out, about a half hour before you're going to cook, you want to cut your eggplants up into about 3/4 inch pieces and salt them fairly generously. Set it aside in a colander. That's going to pull some of the water out of the eggplant. And then we're going to give it a rinse to get the worst of the salt off. Squeeze that and then let it drain. And now the stove part. It's a quick dish. Once we get going, everything's going to end up going in and we'll be good to go. So bring the camera over.
It came undone.
But it should be on the cord there long enough. Yeah, it's got a cable.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, just the cable will follow you.
but I don't see it. I don't see.
Oh, the plug, okay. Technical problems.
Do you see her?
Well,
Yeah,
you
I can
should-
still see her.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, yeah, but to get over here. All right, well, in the pan, we're gonna put a couple of tablespoons of olive oil or vegetable oil. Whatever actually, again, that you have. In a French kitchen, they would probably have oil, olive oil, or vegetable oil. If you get on into Italy, they may have olive oil, they may use actually a bacon fat. Now this dish is vegetarian by nature, but you can add, depending on where you're at in the Mediterranean, the Italians have been known to add pancetta or bits of ham. If you get into Turkey, they put chicken in it.
Ooh.
They'll cook chicken down in it.
Ooh.
as I said, the veggies are just kind of like what you have. So as you travel around the Med, you may find cabbage. You'll find all zucchini or all yellow squash, different kinds of yellow squash, chickpeas or fava beans, green beans, just about any kind of beans that you can pretty much imagine. So okra, that's another one. In fact, a little later, I'm going to put some sliced okra in some that we're going to eat. But it's just, whatever. Look in your fridge. If you've got like some sad celery that, you don't know what else to do, throw it in there. You just chop it up, throw it in. It's a vegetable stew. At the end of the day, it's a vegetable stew. So whatever veggies, if you don't like eggplant, don't put eggplant in there. Okay, put in more squash. So, I mean, don't, the point, the eggplant is nice because it will give you the meaty texture, the chew factor, so you won't feel like you're missing anything. But like I say, if you've had that strong of a feeling about it, leave it out. It's not a big thing. All right. The first thing that's going to go into our pan are our onions. Now my nose is going to itch because I'm not supposed to scratch it, right? Oh, thank you.
Okay. Higher.
And as far as the pan goes, skillet, pot, you kind of see what the ingredients are going to look like. So, the pan that you want. Now, if you don't want to cook it on the stovetop, all them old grandmas thought about that too. Because they didn't always feel like standing around stirring things up, I suppose. So you can put this in once you have some of it cooked or sliced up. Get yourself a 9x13 pan, and you're just going to basically load everything up except your tomatoes. So your squash, your eggplant, your peppers, put them into your pan. Then you're gonna squish up your tomatoes good with your spices and pour that over the top. Slide it in your oven at about 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Takes about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how big your veggies were. And once your veggies are tender, it's done. Now, when they put it in the oven, they refer to it as a tion, which I think is kind of related to gratin. Gratin, like potatoes gratin, which is another fancy-fied French dish that we don't think about. But anyway, so once you have it slide in, of course you can walk off and forget it. Check it every now and then, make sure it doesn't dry out in the oven. If it's getting dry, you just add some water, tomato juice, broth, coffee, beer, wine, some kind of liquid. I don't think I would throw in milk, but broth or whatever you wanted. So this is, we're gonna go till our onions soften up. Can we see in there? Okay. Is there anybody else on there? Okay. Anybody have any questions they want to chime in, just holler. Now, I'm not adding any salt at this point because we did salt the eggplant, and it's going to be bringing some salt with it. And once this is all cooked down, then we'll taste it and adjust for salt if we need it. Okie doke. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to stir in our tomatoes. And like I said, if you're going to use a can, just dump it in, juice and all. Don't have to drain it. Nothing. I'm gonna put this in. Stir that around. And we want to cook this over kind of a medium heat. And our tomatoes are going to start giving up some juices, hopefully. Now, depending on, you say, if you use fresh tomatoes, you may not get quite as much juice as you would if you use a canned tomato. So it just, if you're using it and it looks like it's a bit on the dry side, that's when you would start, again, even on the stovetop, toss in the water or the broth or whatever. And then you can see why they're stirring. Although, truthfully, you don't have to stir. I suppose the stirring may be because they started cooking over wood fires. And I suppose you would need, if you're cooking over I suppose a wood fire or a fireplace. I guess you might have to stir more. Modern stoves, yeah, you're not gonna have to stir as much, I don't think. But as you can see now, my tomatoes are starting to give up. I don't know if you guys can see that, but my tomatoes are starting to give up some liquid, and that's what I want to have happen. Now the eggplant is going to soak that up. Eggplant's kind of like cooking with a sponge, a vegetable sponge. It sucks up. If you ever try to fry eggplant, it will just suck up oil like there's no tomorrow, and you'll end up with like an oil slick of a vegetable. But that works to your advantage, because if you're cooking it in something like a stew, sorry about that. I salted the eggplant, so I pulled out some of the water. So when I put it back in here, it's gonna wanna suck liquid back up. So that's why, that's the next thing to go in. And if I got those tomato juices and the oniony flavors and everything, I'm gonna be putting in my garlic and my spices. Your eggplant's gonna suck all that up. And that's where the flavor gets into your eggplant. Otherwise, eggplant, I don't know, eggplant doesn't really have a taste so much on its own, I think. Okay. And don't get all wrapped around. I know I put times, if you're looking at the recipe, I think I said like 5 minutes or something. Again, this is a grandma old recipe. Just like when you talk to your grandma and she says, well, you cook it till it's done. I hate to do that to you, but you cook it till it's done. And when you see the tomatoes starting to give up their juices, that's good enough. You don't got to watch the clock for 5 minutes on the dot. Okay. Good. Okay. Now, if you have fresh herbs, lucky you. I mostly dry, well, currently I'm mostly dried herbs. I am growing them, so I will have fresh basil, but for the thyme and the oregano, it's dry. So a half a teaspoon, generous, maybe a teaspoon total, but I use my half teaspoon and it's heaped. Okay, and so that's the thyme, oregano. Oregano is oregano. I know there's like Italian and there's Greek and there's Mexican versions of oregano. my palate's not sensitive enough to know, so oregano. If you have it, if you got it fresh and you're growing whatever kind you like, that's what you use. Oh. So, and now my garlic, I mix that around and you're gonna smell it. I wish, we don't have smelly vision, but it smells really good. You'll get that nice herby. And the same, if you're using Italian seasoning blend, about a teaspoon or so, and you put it in, you should smell it, and that works just fine. So if that's what you got, that's what you want to use it. If you don't have fresh garlic, use dried garlic. Teaspoon or so. All right. And yeah, I'm getting good and smelly. So, and now is that drained and rinsed eggplant. And like I said, my tomatoes are a little bit dry, so now our pan's starting to get full. Now your eggplant's gonna get kind of this, when it's sitting in the strainer, it's gonna look kind of like funky brown color, rusty. But once it hits the heat, it's gonna lose that and it'll start picking up. And notice where I had liquid before and now I don't have that much liquid. And that's because that eggplant is sucking it up. So, and that's what we wanted to have happen. So we'll give that a few minutes just to finish. Okay. Now, because my tomatoes these are like my tomatoes from the garden and stuff. And so they are a little drier than I said the canned tomatoes or whatever would be because, well, this year we didn't have a lot of rain. So I added probably half cup of just water there. Okay, let's see how that's going. Oh, that is our summer squash and our bell pepper and our leaves of basil that I just kind of like, I don't know if you can see that, it's just slivered up. And because I'm putting it in, I had fresh, so I'm gonna put it in with the fresh veggies, the other fresh veggies, instead of trying to get it. The point of putting it in with the oil and the tomato juices, your dried herbs, that kind of rehydrates them and helps them get their flavors. Since the basil's fresh, it already has its water and oils and all. It doesn't need to suck anything up to be able to join the party. And now, no real. You see, it makes quite the full skillet. This was when the kids were little. They would eat this. They wouldn't necessarily eat like zucchini some other way or whatever, but they would eat this. And it's, who was I going to complain? It was a way to get veggies in them. So they would, and that's how I know you throw in the green beans, throw in the cabbage, throw in the celery or whatever. And if you need it, if you want, or you need the protein, if you're doing it for, whatever reason, you can put in you can add a can of chickpeas. Just dump them in, liquid and all. At the end, if you need the liquid, you could put the liquid from your chickpeas in beforehand, and then just put the chickpeas in at the end to heat through. And that brings a little more heft to it, as it were. This is put the cover on. I'm going to turn it down, and this will simmer for about 20-30 minutes until your vegetables are cooked. Once the veggies are cooked, I'll check it periodically to make sure it has enough liquid, because it is a stew, so you do want some liquidy consistency. So I don't want it to dry out entirely. If it looks like, for whatever reason, occasionally, you do just get vegetables that seem to give up a lot of liquid. And if you notice that's starting to happen and it looks like, you're floating, then you just take the lid off and let some of that moisture evaporate. So again, I'm going to put it on to simmer, but keeping kind of an eye on things. Once it's done, I have it finished over here. I have one that I made ahead of time. And we'll see, bear with us while we try to swap things back over again. Okay. Now, this is a ratatouille that I made earlier. Now, ratatouille, like all stews, is better the next day. So if you have time and you want to make it up like the evening before, the afternoon before, feel free to do that and put it in a container, set it in the refrigerator. Then when you're ready to eat, you can take it out, warm it up. You can eat it warm. You could eat it cold. You can eat it piping hot. You can eat it at room temperature. It's a real forgiving kind of thing. And so this is, as I said, this is what I made up yesterday. And you see the vegetables don't entirely lose their look. You still identify most everything in there. And you've got liquid, and you can make it as liquidy as you want. Now you could eat this, and they do, the French do, just eat it with bread, butter, and the ratatouille. You could eat it with couscous, and I've eaten it that way. You could eat it with rice. The Italians will eat it over polenta. In the Middle East, of course, you'll get it over couscous. Over in Turkey, you'll get it with a pita sometimes. And like I said, as you see it here, toward the end of the cooking, or when we get to the point where the other was left, if you wanted, they would nestle pieces of chicken, thighs, legs, into it. and let those cook along with, of course, then it's not a vegetarian dish anymore, but everything it is in one pot. So you have a lot of options with it that, you wouldn't have otherwise. And that's basically it. That's Ratatouille in a nutshell. However you want it. And like I say, it sounds fancy, but it's not. So if anybody has any questions, I think, is everybody muted? Oh, well,
They're muted themselves.
oh, okay. All right, well,
It looks really delicious, Lori.
oh, thank you. So we can go back and check and see how the other one's coming, because it should be giving up some of its juices on the one that's on the stove here. So, oops, no, we are going to add. So at this point, you see this one is kind of a little on the dry side. So I am going to add a little more water to that. It is a little on the dry side. And like I said, I was saying, exact proportions, I gave you in the recipe roughly what I aim to use. But don't get too awfully upset, like I say, if something is a little bigger or it seems a little more. Adjust it to suit your own taste. And at this point, if you wanted to add in the green beans, the celery, the okra, the cabbage, whatever you have that you like, you can put in. I even had it with potatoes in it, which actually wasn't bad because the potatoes also soak up. It's, like all stews, like I said, it's great. If it's got overnight to sit, it's really good the next day. It will last in the refrigerator about 3 to 5 days. You can also freeze it and then reheat it later. The only thing I can tell you from experience is if you freeze it, when you reheat it, it does tend to kind of discombobulate, to come apart, whatever. It still tastes good. It still tastes real good. And when I did it with the kids, if I gave them a frozen version, they would actually eat it with baked potatoes and split the baked potato and put it on. And then, knowing them, usually add cheese. But that was one way of getting the veggies in them. And it was frozen, but because it kind of disintegrated, the veggies weren't quite as much in their face. And I think when they were littler, it was kind of like they were thinking of it more as a spaghetti sauce, I think, and eating it. So, and I mean, it is kind of like just really chunky spaghetti sauce, I suppose.
Share it with butter, it's breakfast.
But and Ricky, my oldest son, we call him the Sandwich King. Now, Ricky has been known to make ratatouille sandwiches, which I can't speak to it's edible. I know I've never done it myself. But yes, he did split a baguette and spoon in the ratatouille and had a ratatouille sandwich. So I know it can be done. I don't think it can be neatly done, but you can do it. I can only tell you it's really good over a baked potato. And if the weather's cold, when the weather's cold, it's really good too, when it's hot. Yeah, if you make it and it's like 90 degrees, like our summer has been, room temperature, make it in the morning or make it the day before, and room temperature, and that's one way to get around when you know you need to eat supper, but you just don't feel like turning the stove on, you don't feel like something hot, because the ratatouille is perfectly edible at room temperature. So you could even pack it in a lunch to take to work. It doesn't have to go in the refrigerator. It could just sit and warm up as you take it out in the morning and then let it sit on your desk and warm up over the course, and eat it at room temperature or heat it up in the microwave. It does nuke. So, and that's coffee time. Yeah, coffee time to calm my nerves. That's what this is, because my nerves are getting to me really bad now. So, I'm not a professional cook or a professional chef. I've taken some classes, but I'm a paramedic by training. And just a very avid home cook. And I've lived, because I was born into a military family and I had a military career of my own. I married a military man, and we moved with our family and stuff all around the world. So, and I more or less kind of ate my way around the world as a kid, because you're exposed to all the different families and stuff, and the moms are from every place. So like the late 1960s, and I discovered octopus because my best friend's mom was Japanese. And I came home, I was all ready to go buy octopus. I was ready. And my mom was like, "Oh, I don't know about that." My mother was German, so we had sauerkraut and pork chops and sausage and stuff. But then, every place we lived, I learned to find something to eat. And then you liked it and you would ask how it was made, or you would watch how it was made. And as I got older, I would ask for the recipes. And so that's how Ratatouille came about. We lived in France when I was very small, and I would eat it. And then I went back as an adult, and we lived in Belgium for a while. So I have a pretty wide repertoire of what I will eat. So that's that. So we'll check this. Now, as this cooks, your tomatoes and all are gonna tend to kind of like melt away and disappear, make the sauce. So you're not gonna be eating chunks of tomato. It is gonna make like its own sauce, and you can kind of see there what the tomatoes are breaking down. The onions are gonna do the same thing to an extent. If you cut them small, those will also kind of disintegrate into your sauce. So, just, kind of that's where keeping in mind the color of the veggies that you use. If you can, you get a mix of 2 or 3 colors. It looks nicer for eating purposes, but again, I mean, the point is to feed and be nutritious and to eat seasonably and with an eye on the budget. I mean, everybody's got a budget. So, anybody? That's pretty much. I mean,
You've been pretty self-explanatory this entire
yeah.
time.
So unless anybody has any big questions, I think, Alpa, you have the recipe.
Yes, I will send everyone the recipe and the video. Sorry, there's a puppy in our office. So I will send the recipe as well as a link to the video to everyone who was invited.
Okay, that's great. Well, I mean,
Thank you so much, Lori. This was really, really cool.
you're welcome. And then you said next time we'll start the adventure of, let me walk around here. Next time, maybe we can start the adventure of mac and cheese around the world. Which will be like one or two probably macaroni dishes. We think of macaroni and cheese, but just being more than the yellow kind out of the little blue box. So just to get an idea of what macaroni and cheese is like around the different parts, different countries in the world. So, well, it's like, welcome to my kitchen. And if there's anything anybody is curious about or would like to see, you know, I guess get in contact with you and let you know, and
Yeah,
let's see what we can do.
yeah. And then we'll see you again in 2 weeks to do that macaroni around the world class.
Yeah, our first macaroni dish from around the world. Yep, there's like, you know, a couple different versions. So, bon appetit, everybody who makes it. I hope you do, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you.
Alrighty, thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye. Thanks.
Leave.